Welcome to Eggs and Issues, a monthly business forum presented by the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce, bringing timely economic discussion to the region for nearly 40 years. Thank you to our sponsors and partners. Presenting sponsors, Bank of America and Martins Point Healthcare. Cooperating sponsor, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. Reception sponsors, Clark Insurance, Key Bank, and Viral. Community Corner sponsor, Goral Palmer. Tomorrow's Leaders and Entrepreneurs sponsors, AAA Northern New England and ProSearch. Coffee sponsor, Skowhegan Savings. Parking sponsor, Vitalius Real Estate Group. Media partners, radio sponsor, WGAN. Print sponsor, The Forecaster. TV sponsor, WMTW Maine CW. Business news sponsor, Maine Biz, with production support provided by Headlight. And thank you to our special community partners, Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, MEMIC, Spectrum Healthcare Partners, Southern Maine Community College, and the University of Southern Maine. And now, please welcome Portland Community Chamber President, Britt Vitalius.
Good morning. Welcome to our February 2022 Eggs and Issues program, the monthly business breakfast event series of the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. As we continue the 2021-22 Eggs and Issues season, I would like to welcome everyone joining us today as we are all participating virtually. My name is Britt Vitalius. I'm the president of Vitalius Real Estate Group, a boutique real estate brokerage in Portland, and I'm honored to serve as the volunteer president of the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. Today's presentation relates to a topic of significant interest to me and really to all of us living in the greater Portland area. A conversation on affordable housing will be presented by Dana Totman, President and CEO of Avesta Housing. He will give a brief overview of the current situation and how we got here. I will then have the pleasure of guiding a moderated Q&A discussion with audience questions to follow. But before I hand things over to Dana, I would like to share our appreciation to each of our sponsors of Eggs and Issues who make this event possible, whether we are in person or virtual. Through their financial support, these organizations recognize the value of the Chamber generally, and this event in particular, to the strength, not only of the business community, but the vitality of our entire community. First and foremost, our presenting sponsors, Bank of America, Martins Point Healthcare. I also like to thank our generous sponsors, cooperating sponsor, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, a reception sponsor, Clark Insurance, Key Bank, and Viral, our community corner sponsor, Goral Palmer, Tomorrow's Leaders and Entrepreneurs sponsors, AAA Northern New England, and ProSearch. Through this program, the Chamber can offer students in the region, high school and college, an invitation to attend Eggs and Issues at no cost. Welcome to all our region students who are tuning in and joining us today. Our coffee sponsor, Skowhegan Savings, perhaps it's your own coffee maker today. And our parking sponsor, Vitalius Real Estate Group. Today, maybe it's your own garage or your company parking lot. A special thanks to our media partners, The Forecaster, WGAN, WMTW Maine CW, and Maine Biz. Our FMI sponsor, the Portland Public Library, and production support is provided by Headlight Audiovisual. And the Holiday Inn by the Bay. While we're not meeting in person today, please know that we are able to safely gather each month since September. Our policy has been to require proof of vaccination or negative COVID test, increase the distance between the breakfast tables, and seat only 5 people at a table. It seems like we're in a transition point here, managing safety protocols and expectations around the virus. So stay tuned for plans for next month. I'm hopeful that by the time we get to the end of the season, things may start to look very different than they did at the beginning. And a very special thank you to our special community partners who support all of our Chamber initiatives: Spectrum Healthcare Partners, University of Southern Maine, Southern Maine Community College, and MEMIC. Let's have a virtual round of applause for all of our generous sponsors. Before we begin today's program, I'd like to also welcome our newest members of the Chamber. Over the past quarter, the Chamber has welcomed nearly 24 new members, ranging in size and scope from nonprofit support agencies to large hotel groups, machine manufacturing, to local restaurants and janitorial services to the creative arts. The Chamber membership is as diverse as the Portland region's business community. Now, before we begin, I want to remind you that like all Eggs and Issues programs, we will be recording the event today, which will be available at the Chamber's YouTube channel. During the presentation, you can submit questions for Dana in the chat. And if time allows, I will incorporate some audience questions following the presentation and our discussion. If you have any additional questions following today's program, you are welcome to send them to the Chamber at chamber@portlandregion.com. Now, on to today's topic, a conversation on affordable housing with Dana Totman. As I tried to put together a proper intro for Dana, I started to look through his bio, boards he served on, a list of awards and public recognitions, educations, etc. It became clear we could spend our entire hour together just going through all that. So suffice it to say, Dana is one of the most respected voices in this state on affordable housing development and his understanding of housing policy and on the growth of Avesta under his 22 years of leadership, which is both impressive and inspiring. I've personally known Dana for more than a decade. Together, we were two of the 4 founding members of an organization called the Quality Housing Coalition, which focuses on opening up market rate apartments to tenants and families who would otherwise have difficulty accessing these 2 units. We are particularly fortunate to have Dana with us today because, as many of you know, he recently announced that he will retire later this year. So we've got him on the way out, and I know he's got some things he wants to say. Please welcome Dana Totman.
Thank you very much, Britt, and good morning, everyone. This year marks the 50th anniversary of Avesta Housing. And also, as Britt mentioned, it's the year that I'm going to retire after 22 years here. So naturally, I've been doing a lot of reflecting and thinking and analyzing. I've been trying to figure out what's worked and what hasn't. And I wish I could report today that the need for affordable housing has decreased over the past 5 decades, or certainly the last 22 years. But unfortunately, I can't. In fact, the need for affordable housing is fundamentally now far greater than it has ever been in Avesta's 50-year history. And so I want to share kind of how did we get here and what should we do going forward. So to start, I just want to take a look at the affordable housing world back in the 60s and the 70s. HUD was created in 1965. And the same year, the Farmers Home Administration started financing multifamily housing in a big way. That was 1965. Maine State Housing Authority was created in 1969. And then in 1972, 2 local community action agencies came together to create York Cumberland Housing, which is today known as Avesta Housing. So in short, the need for affordable housing and the government's role in affordable housing really took off just about 50 years ago. Fundamentally, in 1970, the housing we had wasn't exactly the housing we needed. The housing then was often in poor condition. It may be lacking plumbing, might have been overcrowded. Many lived in institutions in 1970 or in nursing homes. And back then, some of the older baby boomers were first venturing out trying to buy their first home, but they couldn't. So that's a bit of how things were then. And I could end my talk right now and simply conclude that the mismatch today between the housing we have and the housing we need is far worse than it was 50 years ago. But I believe to solve this issue, we should understand how it came to be and examine some of these significant changes. In 1970, the average household size in Maine was 3.2 people. In 2020, it was 2.3. So that tells me 2 things. We need a lot more homes to house the same population, nearly a third more, and we need smaller homes. In 1970, the population of Aroostook County was 92,000 people. And today it is 67,000. So we probably need fewer houses up there. In 1970, Cumberland County's population was 193,000. And today it's 298,000. Obviously, we need a lot more homes in Cumberland County, and many have been built. In 1970, there were 4,200 people living in state institutions. Today, there are 132 people living in these same facilities. In 1970, there were virtually no homeless individuals in Maine. And today, on any given night, there are well over 2,000 homeless persons. In 1970, 12% of Maine's population was over the age of 65. Today, 20% are over 65. Maine now has the oldest population in the country. Maine also has some of the oldest housing stock in the country, and we have twice as many homes built before 1940 than the national average. So let's just stop a minute and think about this mismatch between the housing we have and the housing we need. The only real way of addressing the mismatch is to produce what we need where we need it. We're not going to convert a 4-bedroom farmhouse in Aroostook County into an efficiency apartment in Portland. And we're not going to convert a room at Amhi into an apartment in Saco. So our housing is often in the wrong locations. It may be the wrong size, the wrong price, it may not have the accessibility we need, and it may be in poor condition. So we must build new affordable housing. We must build it. It's not going to just occur. We've produced quite a bit of affordable rental housing in the past 50 years, but the trend is just not encouraging. As you can see, during the 70s and early 80s, HUD and the U.S. Department of Agriculture were going gangbusters, getting funds to Maine, and housing was getting built as a result. In fact, there were nearly 1,100 new rental units added each year in the 70s. In the mid-80s, this effort was largely curtailed due to a major shift in federal policy. So rather than 1,100 units, it was now barely half. And rather than have HUD and the Agriculture Department oversee housing starting in the 80s, the federal policy shifted the responsibility to the IRS. And the IRS became the primary player in the creation of affordable rental housing through the use of the low-income housing tax credit. There's a huge difference between the housing created in the 70s and the 80s and what is created today with the tax credit program. Housing of the 70s and 80s served a much poorer population. Each household, no matter how low their income, paid 30% of their income on housing. With today's tax credit housing, the rent is only slightly less than market rent. And as a result, very low income households can generally not afford the tax credit rents that drive the housing that's been built in the last 3 decades. The very low income households can afford the housing that was developed in the 70s and 80s, but they can't afford the more recently developed housing. Let's take a look. Avesta's first affordable rental development was 30 Birch Lane in Gorham in 1973 that you'll see there on the top, using funds from the Department of Agriculture. The average annual income of the residents living in this development today, 49 years later, is $15,000. There are 220 people currently on the waiting list to move into 30 Birch Lane, and we'll probably have 3 or 4 openings in the coming year. Now below, let's look at a similar development created using tax credits in 2014. And this one is in South Berwick, called Young Street. And at Young Street, the average income is $27,000. And there are 27 people on the wait list. And we'll also probably have 3 or 4 openings. So there are far more, I would estimate 4 times as many senior households needing affordable housing with incomes in that $15,000 range than there are with incomes in the $27,000 range. So unfortunately, we're not building housing for the group that needs it the most. There are far more people with incomes of $15,000 needing housing than $27,000, but we're building the housing for the folks with incomes of $27,000. Here in Maine in the past decade, we've produced less than a third of what occurred in the 70s. And we're housing people today who are far less impoverished. That is why we have a huge housing problem. Looking at this pie chart, you can see that there are 3 departments, federal departments, that have contributed to affordable housing. The IRS in the light blue, HUD in the dark blue, and the Department of Agriculture in the brown. All have contributed about a third of our housing stock. However, currently it's the IRS is the only one that's really active. So as we go forward, unless there's dramatic change in federal policy, that light blue pie share will get bigger and bigger. So just think about this for a minute. And with a setup like this, and you kind of look at that, you might say, who's in charge of our country's affordable housing? Should it be the IRS? Or the Agriculture Department? Or HUD? And HUD, who hasn't really created a new housing developments in a generation. So between HUD and Agriculture and IRS, who should be responsible? I simply don't know. I don't know the answer to that very basic question. And I think that's a fundamental problem as well. We don't know who's in charge of affordable housing. Today, Maine Housing, who we do know is largely in charge in Maine, is very busy watching over the array of housing that's been built in the past 50 years, reviewing audits, doing all the bureaucratic things to satisfy HUD and to satisfy the Department of Agriculture and the IRS. And they do their absolute best, and they do a good job creating some new housing using the very less than ideal resource, the low-income housing tax credit. But it is not enough. This is the production of new rental housing units in the past 7 years. As you can see, we've been producing in the range of 200-300. The good news is there's been an uptick in the last 2 years, and in 2021, there were 454 new homes created in Maine. But this is a far cry from the 1,000 that we really need, or the 1,000 that was created in the 70s. I think I read last week that Maine Housing said there's about 25,000, a need for about 25,000 additional units. Had we continued at the pace of the 70s, we would have 25,000 more affordable homes than in fact we have. So it's not too hard to figure out why we have the problem. I think Maine has a long way to go in terms of getting support services as well, combined with housing. The speed at which we've been creating assisted living, which clearly we have that old population, is not very good. We've created 0 new affordable assisted living units in the last 20 years. And for persons that have disabilities or might be homeless that need some sort of services combined with their housing, we completed 5 supportive housing units last year. So the progress is dismal at best. The affordable housing industry has long focused on buildings and finances and compliance and regulations. And we use terms like authorities, median income, tax credits, pro formas, and certifications. Those terms just don't inspire me to come to work every day. What inspires me is understanding what people need so I can help them. I want to know how a different home will change their life. I'd love to listen to applicants explain what type of home they're looking for. I enjoy visiting our properties and just watching residents and families come and go. Who really needs new affordable housing among the various groups? I feel there are 4 groups that we should prioritize. The first group are seniors. Maine has the oldest population in nature. When it is combined with old housing, it's all too common that an elderly couple, widow or widower, is stuck in some big old rural farmhouse like this one, probably with a leaky roof. In many cases, they've stayed so long and have been isolated in these old homes that they can no longer care for themselves and they need assisted living. However, they are either too stubborn, too poor, too confused, or stuck on some wait list so that they continue to live in places like you just saw. There has not been one unit of affordable assisted living added in Maine in 20 years. And we have two affordable senior living developments, assisted living developments here at Avesta, and each has several hundred people on the wait list, and the waits are generally 5 years or longer. That's a tough message to send. Let's move on to people are homeless, which is a second group, I think, that need our help. We're not doing a good job in this area. I think we can all agree that our effort to deinstitutionalize people from institutions didn't go well, as this graph suggests. Neither our community-based mental health delivery system nor our affordable housing supply was ready, properly financed, or adequate. Ensuring that services were aligned with the housing was even further off the mark. Many agencies tried during the 90s and early 2000s to help out. Some created some supportive housing, and that had mixed results, especially after the initial residents moved out, because the other residents that moved in might have needed something slightly different. Some agencies opened up homeless shelters. Of note, 15 years ago in Portland, there were 8 agencies that ran 12 homeless shelters. Today, there are 4 agencies running 6 shelters. So our approach to sheltering has been sporadic at best. And again, last year, there were 5 new units of supportive housing created in the entire state. The third group, beyond seniors and persons that are homeless, that I want to highlight are new Mainers, immigrants. We've all read about the masses staying in the South Portland area hotels. Most are asylum seekers from Central Africa. We house as many as possible here at Avesta. Probably over half our 1,100 Portland area family units are rented to immigrants. This group is very difficult to serve, however, because they come here and they have no source of rent payment. And they're not eligible for most federal resources as well. So it takes a very creative approach that includes general assistance and some sort of guarantor. The wait period for these new Mainers to get a work permit is just frustrating. We fully understand how we need to increase our labor force, and this is the obvious population. And it's our job to provide them housing so that they can start to fill those jobs. The fourth group that I'm going to mention are first-time homebuyers. Last year, there were 725 people participating in Maine Housing's first-time homebuyer program. This was far and away the lowest number in years. There were 3 times this many buying their first home with Maine Housing's program 25 years ago. 3 times as many 25 years ago. So a healthy housing market must have movement and transitions, and our home buying market is a mess. We all know that. There's not enough houses, the prices are too high, young people can't find their way in. We run home buying classes here for first-time home buyers at Avesta, and the excitement among the students has always been incredibly refreshing. However, since the pandemic started and housing inventory has plummeted, the students now appear more like a disgruntled support group than eager buyers. If people can't buy, they can't vacate their rental units. Moving a resident out of rental housing creates an opening to move someone else in. This movement just doesn't happen enough. We've helped about 20,000 households here over the years, and the vast majority have been successful. Few have not. I want to give you a few examples. I have many cherished memories of residents. I know our housing has changed and arguably saved their lives. One resident, Z, as you can see here, Z suffered from severe alcoholism and addiction. He was homeless, and he was in and out of jail and emergency rooms for decades. Z had been stabbed while asleep under the Casco Bay Bridge. and he likely wouldn't have survived another winter. He moved into Logan Place, where he was safe, and he lived there for over 6 years before passing away. He was a little disruptive and difficult as a resident, and he clearly never conquered his addiction and his alcoholism, but he was safe, warm, and he was reasonably happy. Perhaps best of all, Z reconnected with his daughters, whom he hadn't seen in many years. The housing and services that Z received provided him a life with dignity. Mary was a widow who moved into one of our senior developments in 1997 at the age of 76. And she had limited financial resources. She needed an accessible and affordable home. And so she moved into a Gorham facility that we had. And she made many friendships there. And she and 2 other widows led the social activities for the entire complex. In 2018, Mary's eyesight was failing. So she moved next door to our affordable assisted living complex, where she will celebrate her 101st birthday in a couple of weeks. Until the pandemic came along, I'd visit Mary regularly just to get inspired. Daniel and Benjamin came to Maine with their mother, Adolphine, from Rwanda nearly 10 years ago. The entire family had escaped their war-torn country with nothing. We were able to provide them with an affordable 2-bedroom apartment on Brick Hill in South Portland. All 3 started working as soon as they got their work permits. Both boys have now graduated from Husson University. Benjamin works in the human service field and recently bought a 2-unit apartment building in Lewiston of his own. Daniel recently bought a home in Falmouth, where he lives with his mother. Daniel just decided to become a long-haul truck driver because he enjoys driving and making money. This is a great example of people moving into our housing and then moving out, creating opportunities for others to move in. I could go on and on talking about many successes among the people we've housed while I've been here at Avesta. And unfortunately, I can also talk about failures when our residents, who were given several tries, just failed, largely because they were not receiving the support services they needed. Our property management staff have been threatened, they've been harassed, they've been targeted, and we have seen and witnessed some horrific incidents, knowing all the time instances where our housing just didn't succeed for these individuals because they needed social services far above and beyond what affordable housing currently offers. They needed those services in addition to the housing. I really think there are not many in our society who really see the effects of abject poverty up close, or see the frightening side of untreated mental illness. Or we see that senior resident who can simply no longer take care of themselves, but they have no other place to go. We see that every day. I'm very moved by the humanity side of housing. And for me, the sight of a homeless person, a depressed, frail senior, or an asylum-seeking family with absolutely nothing is so powerful that I just assume government leaders will be moved like I am and take bold action. But here we are. I could make an equally compelling argument from an economic perspective rather than a humanity perspective. I could point out that it costs more in emergency room visits and police encounters to leave homeless persons unhoused than it costs to house them. Or that the cost of healthcare for frail seniors and unstable housing is far greater than the cost when they're appropriately housed. Or that the value of immigrants helping employers fill the thousands of vacant jobs is immeasurable. Our municipal governments today are talking about housing more than ever before, which is really encouraging. Town after town is calling us, looking for help with their housing. This is a very significant trend that I've observed, and I think it's great. But it's not all healthy, like in Portland, where we see the pitting of renters versus landlords and the government by referendum. Here it appears that the talking is more combative than constructive. The NIMBYism in Cape Elizabeth is a reminder to all of us that part of our society is less than welcoming to other parts. But my biggest frustration with all levels of government when it comes to providing housing to those who need it is the lack of urgency. We just don't act as if this is an urgent problem. We're on the front lines here. We see the pleas, we see the crying, the desperation of thousands just wanting to have a decent roof over their heads. If we could all simply embrace the notion that everyone deserves a place to call home and that providing decent shelter is something everyone needs to help with, we can start making things better. I think we can all agree that our governments, they're not going to fix us. They haven't. And it's very easy to point to Maine State Housing Authority, a HUD, a rural development, or anybody and think they're going to fix it. They're not. They don't have enough resources to fix it. It's going to take philanthropic help. It's going to take volunteerism. It's going to take personal contributions. It's going to take community involvement. And it's going to take private sector contributions. It's going to take everybody. So with 30 years in this housing industry, I want to leave you with 10 recommendations for how I think we should address the affordable housing needs of low-income Mainers. First is to urge all levels to focus on affordable rental production. We should measure and report production and set production goals of at least 1,000 rental homes in Maine per year. Second is to create rental opportunities for those with the lowest incomes by combining vouchers, which is what was happening in the 70s, and rent subsidies with the new units that are being produced. Number 3 would be to require that the human service delivery system provide on-site and on-demand services at affordable housing complex that serve populations with special needs. Fourth is to minimize the loss of our VRBOs and Airbnbs through the regulation or increasing significant fees. If we succeed in producing more housing, but we're losing housing at the same time, that's not okay. So we need to do something to minimize the loss of units to VRBOs. 5 is to support zoning changes. This will help some. Certainly if we do some of the things from the recent state zoning commission that I served on, that would help. That commission recommended that we do everything possible to add more density, more housing on less land, that we provide for the routine addition of ADUs, accessory dwelling units, as a matter of right, that we minimize the single family only zones and that allow much more building of 2 and 4 units on what used to be limited to single families. The recommendations include granting zoning bonuses for affordable housing. And perhaps of significant importance is to provide financial and technical assistance to municipalities to help them change their zoning so that more housing will get built. Number 6 among my recommendations is to develop more first-time homebuyer programs with priorities for renters currently living in affordable housing. Number 7 is to creatively use Medicaid and other resources to produce additional assisted living developments. Number 8 would be to build a new family shelter / welcome facility for new Mainers, and as well to build other new homeless shelters. Homelessness is not going to go away, and I think we need some better shelters. Number 9 would be to substantially connect affordable housing to the philanthropic and volunteer sectors. This is a major shift. Philanthropy and contributions have long gone to colleges and museums and the like. I think it's time that affordable housing became one of the considerations. And 10 is to make affordable homes a priority and to act with urgency. I want to end the presentation by returning to the picture of the old farmhouse. I indicated that many widows or widowers live in places like this too long because they're too poor, too stubborn, too confused, or stuck on a waiting list and simply can't find their way out. This old farmhouse did house an old widower whose Yankee independence had morphed into depressing isolation. And he was living in squalor, leaky roof, frozen pipes. And he was too stubborn to move out, just plain stubborn and depressed. But he saved practically every penny that he'd ever earned from milking cows. And fortunately, he eventually did move into assisted living. And he cleaned up, started putting his teeth in, started eating again. He actually gained 11 pounds. And he lived that year in assisted living in a responsible way. He died with complete dignity a year later. And that widower was my father. And my room was located in those upper windows on the left. My bedroom was there. So I just want to pause there for a minute so that there are ways that people can move out of those unfortunate places into better places. I think everyone should be able to live with dignity and to be able to live in a suitable home. And I really think we know what needs to be done. 50 years ago, affordable housing really took off and we started producing. It's time to do it again. Thank you very much.
Dana, thank you so much. It's such as you just outlined, it is such a large issue, and it's so systemic. It's from the federal government down to our local communities, agencies, and it touches so many pieces here. It seems like it's hard for any individual to get their arm around it, but this is really interesting hearing about the history. We've certainly all heard a lot of presentations on affordable housing and all our housing issues. And even just hearing the history in the context of where we are today and where we have been, that we're not really on the same track. We hear about agencies, and there are agencies responsible for housing, and there's Maine State Housing, and we just assume it's sort of being taken care of. But it's very interesting to hear that it's not the same, and it's not being taken care of in the same way. I want to remind folks listening that you can submit questions in the chat, and I will catch some of those in a little bit, but I want to start with just a little bit of more of a conversation with Dana before we get to that. Dana, the pandemic, how has that impacted housing, your ability to do work, or any other sort of affordable housing initiatives?
The pandemic has really affected us in several major ways. Clearly, we're out building and constructing and developing new housing, and the supply chain problems and the labor cost have significantly driven up the cost of new housing. And what used to be 12 months to develop a new housing complex is now 16 or 18 months. So the cost and speed has resulting from the pandemic has changed things a lot. The other thing that I would share, though, is we always fundamentally have tried to create community, and within our developments, we want people helping people and try to have activities like cooking or gardening or art or after school work where they help one another. And now we're doing everything to discourage community. We don't want them coming together. We're locking our community rooms up. At our assisted living, the best part of their day is to come together for the meals, and instead we're taking the meals up to them and asking them, don't mingle. So that sort of absence of community and the effects it has, and then we got to deal with the effects, is the most notable thing that I've seen during the pandemic, that the whole sense of community is different. We need to rely on technology. We need to be prepared to deploy appropriate mental health to those that are struggling with the isolation. So I think those are one is a very humanistic thing, and the other is just constructing housing is more difficult.
Yeah. It reminds me of the discussions we're having about schools and kids and the impacts of all this, and hopefully we're coming out the other side. So you just spent a lot of time on a commission, I think convened by the state and Speaker Fecto. Do you want to say anything more about that? You came out with a lot of recommendations. You said 10 of your own that I think probably overlapped on some things that came out of that. Is there anything else that you'd want to highlight out of that group?
Well, just that those were 10 there were 6 or 8 major recommendations from that commission. And but they're only recommendations. They now need to go to the legislature. They need to be written into bills and perhaps becoming laws. And so there's a lot of detail. The big one there is to do away with single family housing. That scares many. I think there's a lot more in the details there. Obviously adding accessory dwelling units that people can have over their garage or in an attic of their house, can create another unit or 2 here and there. But there's really a variety of pieces of legislation, and I think they'll all help. I think they're going to require a lot of difficult decisions on the municipal side in terms of how do you implement these? Do towns like them? Do they not like them? So it's worth, I think, following what happens with this. Ultimately, we're trying to create greater density where more housing can be built in more places.
Well, hopefully some of those things get through. It looks like some are going to be controversial, but you seemed optimistic that there's going to be some real support for them too. A lot of this comes down to money, and it's much more complex than that, but the state of Maine, through the rental assistance and ARPA funds, foreclosure assistance, is any of this going to help? Is any of this going to make a dent and address some of the pieces we're thinking about today?
There is a lot of money flowing right now. The emergency rental assistance program itself is $350 million coming to Maine. And essentially anybody that earns less than 80% of median income, which is most renters, is essentially eligible. And so I think, one of the key things is to make sure everybody tries to get to sign up for that money because they're poor. And if they can save a little money on their rent, then that starts to make their life better. But overall, I think the emergency rental assistance, the foreclosure assistance, and some of the other pots of money are quite temporary in nature. I oftentimes think, geez, if we hadn't provided that $350 million for emergency rental assistance, we could probably create 2,000-3,000 new units that would last us for another 100 years. There wasn't any public discussion. The money just came from Washington, and here we have, and so we're going to make the most of it. We certainly want to spend it, and not because if we don't, it's going to go to another state. So I think the key is to make the best out of this money that's coming with us. But from a big global perspective, I'm not sure it's the best strategy overall for our affordable housing needs.
Well, and that brings me back to sort of this, we've got this group action problem. It's like climate change or something on that scale where it affects the entire community, it affects the entire state, and yet we're called on as individuals and as communities to help address it in some cases. And some aspects are so far away at the federal government, how are we going to change the IRS structure? The people listening today, what can they do? But for the local pieces, like what can we do? We got this money, we're going to use it as we can, but we're hearing the concerns today. What can we do as private individuals, as a business community, and as members of our own towns to help this problem? You and I have been involved in a lot of conversations and referendum, and there's NIMBYs, and there's all this. Is it just talks like this and awareness? Is there something else will start to flip the switch?
I think, many of us have a home to go to at night, and we think about our homes, and we're somewhat blind to those whose living situation is not like our own, and I think that's only natural. So, I think as individuals, whether it's participating in a municipality's discussion about changing the zoning, whether it's participating in a municipality's acceptance or rejection of a new affordable housing development is important. I think contributing money, frankly, to this cause, whether it's contributing, urging some of our foundations to create community loan funds where they're sort of providing monies to sort of take a risk on some of these first-time home buyers. I think sort of getting all of them to just be figuring out how can their resources maybe go to the affordable housing cause is important. Certainly employers that, may shrug and say, geez, I can't find anybody to work here because they can't find any housing. Or say, well, I guess they're going to have to move to Buxton or Standish and drive further. Maybe you got to do more than that, and maybe they too are going to have to contribute. Certainly, in many parts of the country, hospitals are contributing to affordable housing in a big way. So it's whether it's through your employer or through your giving or through your municipal participation, just do it. We can get very excited about a lot of causes, and whether it's our kids' school or sports or the environment, let's just have affordable homes be one of those causes that excites us.
So as a community, we really need to put our money where our mouth is. We did some polling some years ago, and affordable housing came up as the top concern in the Portland area of local residents. But we need to follow that with action and dollars. Let's see. Let me look at some of the questions we've got from folks listening. Do you see effective government? This is from Thomas Kelly. How do you see effective government support for rehab and improvement of the old housing stock that was supported 30 and 50 years ago?
I think this is a great question because, sometimes we say we have two Maines. We've got a rural Maine, we've got an urban Maine. We probably have 6 Maines where there are very different housing markets, from Camden to Portland to Bridgeton to Van Buren. I mean, in many of our rural parts of the state, it probably is worth fixing up some of the housing and trying to save it. And so I think, now the only real home repair program that exists is the weatherization program. And there's a lot more money coming into that program as well, a real lot more money. And so I think that program itself can hopefully reach a lot of folks. But the tricky part, and Tom's question is some homes are too far gone. And how do you sort of play God and say, we're going to fix up that house, but that one, it's time to move the people out, move them somewhere else. That's the hard part. And so, and there's no real delivery system. The community action agencies or local contractors or municipalities, who's going to make that decision? So any home repair program, I think we need to figure out what houses do we want to save, whose job is it to figure that out, and then how do you deliver the work? But I, in general, think, like my father's old farmhouse, it's time to tear it down. He would love to have had that house fixed up and to stay there until he was carried out in a pine box, which is what he said was always going to happen. But no, he's a mess. Tear it down and move out. So it's a very hard, cold thing. But some homes should not be invested in, and we need to tear them down.
This may just be a general question from Katie Tavares. What do you think is needed to create more affordable assisted living to serve our aging Mainers?
and this is particularly hard now because of the labor shortage. It takes a lot of people to work in assisted living, and this notion of bringing people together is not what the pandemic is all about. But getting on the other side of that, and let's assume at some point people will be able to congregate again. I think it's going to take some creative uses of Medicaid. I think it's going to, and there's a very clumsy connection between Maine State Housing Authority's tax credit funds and the Medicaid rules coming through DHS, and it's just a clumsy fit. There's a group now that's taking a look at it. A very slow group, going to meet 4 times between now and the end of the year. I really think the senior advocates need to push this forward with a little more force. I don't think folks are speaking up enough, and I think people sort of given up, and it's like, instead bring the care to me, and somebody's living in a mobile home down a dirt road, isolated and depressed. I don't think we need to give up on assisted living and think we just need to combine those Maine housing and DHS resources and commit to building some each and every year. And I think the Department of Human Services can be a little more creative in how they use their resources, but it's also going to take a little more advocacy from the aging community.
One last sort of policy question. This is a tough one, and it's political in terms of how people are going to land on this. From John Volz, can you talk about how you think Maine should balance state housing policy and local control? He notes that Maine Municipal Association, GPCOG, both opposed some of the state level housing policies. I mean, this is what can potentially make it a hot potato.
Well, it certainly was just below the surface or just above the surface on the zoning commission. Over time, the state has sort of jumped in on things like shoreland zoning, where on an environmental front, there's sort of been dictating to municipalities on what can happen and cannot happen. I think affordable housing is maybe as important an issue as clean lakes and rivers, and so I think the state has got to jump in a little bit more. At the same time, I'm a fan of local government and local control. Unfortunately, we've got a few too many local governments in Maine, at whatever it is, 460 governments. So, I think I think good government starts at the local level, and folks want to do the responsible thing. But I think in this case, we're going to have to push the zoning issue a little bit, push the opening with the priority for affordable housing onto them a little bit. So I think the state might have to be a little heavier handed. But I don't like putting it that way, because I'd much rather say, this is good stuff. It's good. It should be, hopefully it's what the town wants to do. But I would also say that a key part of our zoning commission's discussion was we need to provide some money to the municipalities. We need to provide some technical assistance to help them get there. And I think with that ongoing dialogue between the state and the municipalities, it doesn't have to be quite as a fight of local control versus state control as it starts out. So I think, the number of towns that are coming to us just begging for affordable housing, I think is a pretty good place to start, because the state's begging for the same thing. So we're kind of on the same page, I think, between these levels of government. And I think that's something to work with. But it's going to require a whole lot of communication between state officials and local officials, and hopefully that'll be constructive.
These are tough issues when it's a big problem that spans a big geography, whether it's climate or housing. We want to retain local control, but the problem needs to also have the perspective of the broad purview. And I think we've seen the challenges locally with referendum, whether it's a Green New Deal or for a shelter or the threat of a referendum to oppose new housing. It's hard when you get down into the local level to actually implement the change. Folks want it they want to help, but maybe somewhere else.
I will say, I was on the planning board in Brunswick for 9 years, and we routinely would require the developer to go to state to get necessary permits for entering state highways or transportation. And so, we sort of have let the state come in and affect things on highways and driving. And as I mentioned, rivers and streams, and followed their rules. Maybe the housing policy, deserves similar respect. So, after a while, municipalities kind of respond okay.
Well, I want to thank everyone for their questions from the audience and the chat. In the last few minutes, I just want to ask Dana, what are you going to miss when you retire? And if you want to share, what are you looking forward to doing?
I'm going to miss working with great people. I'm going to miss working on this cause. I've loved my time working with Maine State Housing Authority and officials in Portland, and most importantly, I think the great people here at Avesta that I just love coming to work every day and being around. And so to suddenly not have that, it's going to be a little shock to my system. I know I'm going to miss it. On the flip side, I have always been kind of at war ever since growing up on that dairy farm. I got up too early, too long, and so for 40 years I've been trying to avoid early starts to the day because I had too many when I was young. And so I'm not going to miss early morning meetings like this. So that's a change I'm looking forward to. So yeah, it's been great. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I've been cooped up in an office for 45 years, and I love the outdoors and love the farming and love hiking and climbing mountains. So I hope to spend a little more time outdoors, whether it's mowing lawns or helping a lobsterman, I don't know what. But I also would really like to do a little consulting here and there, helping municipalities and other nonprofits with their causes. So some combination of all of that, but I'm absolutely going to miss my work here and the great people I've been able to work with.
Well, thank you so much for the time this morning. It was, sorry to make you get up early. I'm also not a morning person. It was really an honor for me to be able to have this conversation with you. I was sad that we're not doing it in person, but happy that we had this time. We're sad to see you go from your current role, but I think we all kind of suspect that maybe you're not going too far, and we'll be seeing you still around the game for a while. So thank you so much, Dana, this morning.
Thank you, Britt.
As we conclude today's program, you can view a complete list of all the Chamber's upcoming events on the Chamber's website. We encourage you to subscribe to the Chamber's newsletter and be sure to follow the Chamber across all major social media platforms. We look forward to seeing you on March 9th for our Eggs and Issues event. We will hear from Dr. Herman Haller of Mount Desert Island Biological Laboratory and the work they are doing with natural organ repair and limb regeneration. How's that for a business topic? Thank you all for tuning in this morning. Have a great day, and we'll see you next month.